What if a ship built to save an empire carried within it the spark of its own destruction? Imagine a fortress of steel, armored from bow to stern, her deck shielded by iron thick enough to resist the deadliest bombs. She was called the Great Phoenix, a promise that Japan could still rise from fire. Yet her fate was already sealed, written not by enemies alone but by flaws hidden in her very design. She did not rise, she burned, and with her went the last hope of a navy once feared across the oceans. This is not only the story of a warship, it is the story of pride turned to ash, of men who fought and died inside a tomb of steel, and of a nation chasing salvation through one miracle ship. The year was 1944. The Pacific War had entered its final act. Japan, battered and desperate, placed its faith in a single carrier, Taihō. While the United States launched wave after wave of Essex-class carriers, Japan poured its dwindling strength into this one vessel, believing she could shift the tide of Chentrong, the Gyoilan II. But the sea, indifferent and merciless, would reveal a harsher truth. The sound of hammers echoed through the naval arsenal at Yokosuka in the year 1941. Sparks flew from welding torches, steel plates groaned as they were riveted into place, and blueprints spread across tables promised a ship unlike any the world had seen. She was not to be just another carrier. She was to be an armored citadel upon the sea. Her name was Taihō, the Great Phoenix, and her birth was wrapped in the fever of hope. For the workers who toiled day and night, she was more than steel. A young dockhand remembered standing at the base of her rising hull, craning his neck toward the sky, whispering to himself, "This ship will protect Japan." To him, she was proof that his homeland still possessed strength, even as bombs rained on cities and resources dwindled. When she touched water in 1943, Taihō towered above her predecessors. Over 30,000 tons of armored promise slid into the sea, her engines capable of speeds that could outrun battleships. She carried the pride of a nation and the prayers of men who believed she could endure what others had not. To them, she was not only a warship, she was a miracle, a phoenix destined to rise when all else had fallen. By the spring of 1944, the Great Phoenix was no longer a dream in steel. She had become the flagship of Admiral Ozawa, the commander of Japan's mobile fleet. When Taihō's engines first roared to life, vibrations thrummed through her armored frame, and the men aboard felt as if the ship herself was breathing. From her expansive hangar decks, rows of Zero fighters and torpedo bombers gleamed beneath the floodlights. Mechanics smelled fresh paint mixed with oil, and pilots walked the steel corridors, whispering that this ship would carry them to victory. Pride swelled in their chests. For the first time since Midway, many believed they were aboard a vessel that could withstand the storm. Yet beneath the surface, unease stirred. Veterans who had seen Coral Sea and Midway remembered how quickly carriers could perish. In the mess hall, a hush fell whenever the word Midway was spoken. Laughter among sailors was often too loud, too forced, as if to cover the dread none wished to confess. Still, Taihō stood as the center of hope. She was more than Ozawa's command post. She was the embodiment of Japan's last gamble, a fortress that seemed unbreakable, guiding her fleet toward the decisive clash already looming on the horizon. As Taihō led the mobile fleet into the Philippine Sea, the scale of the coming battle became painfully clear. Reports poured into Admiral Ozawa's flag plot. Across the horizon advanced the American Fifth Fleet, an armada unlike anything the Pacific had yet seen. 15 carriers, 7 battleships, and scores of cruisers and destroyers. Above them waited swarms of Hellcat fighters flown by men hardened through years of combat. Against this tide, Ozawa could marshal only 9 carriers. Many of their decks carried planes flown by boys with scarcely 50 hours in the cockpit. Their training had been rushed, their nerves untested. For every squadron Japan launched, the Americans could unleash 10. On Taihō's bridge, officers studied maps with grim faces. They knew the odds, yet doctrine demanded confrontation. The decisive battle, promised for years, had finally come. Pride whispered that the Great Phoenix could stand against the storm. But in the steel corridors below, sailors felt the weight of silence. Some polished their guns with trembling hands. Others folded photographs of wives and children, slipping them into pockets before the order to fight. The contrast was stark. America wielded numbers. Japan held only faith. And at the heart of that faith was Taihō, one ship meant to defy the impossible. Morning broke on June 19, 1944, with a deceptive calm across the Philippine Sea. Taihō sliced through blue water at the head of the mobile fleet, her flight deck alive with the thunder of engines preparing to launch. Above, Japanese fighters clawed toward the sky. Below, unseen in the deep, a hunter waited. The submarine, USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, had stalked the fleet since dawn. Through the narrow lens of his periscope, Blanchard saw what few submariners ever glimpsed, the flagship of Japan's carrier force, moving fast yet straight into his sights. He later wrote in his log, "It was the largest warship I had ever seen through the scope. If we could strike her, it might change the course of the battle." At 10:49, 6 torpedoes surged from Albacore's tubes, their white wakes tearing upward through the sea. On Taihō's bridge, lookouts screamed warnings, sirens blared, the great carrier heeled hard to port, her turbines straining. One torpedo missed astern. Another veered away. For a heartbeat it seemed she might escape. Then came the impact. A dull metallic crack shuddered through her hull. One warhead slammed into her starboard side near the aviation fuel tanks. Men were thrown from their feet. Bulkheads groaned. In the machinery spaces, pipes burst, spraying steam. Yet above deck, Taihō remained steady. Her engines held. To onlookers, the mighty Phoenix had shrugged off the blow. But in the shadows below, invisible danger had begun to seep, drop by drop, into every breath her crew would take. At first glance, the Phoenix seemed unshaken. Planes still launched from her deck, engines roaring into the sky. Admiral Ozawa received reports that the damage was minor. Confidence returned, if only on the surface. But deep within Taihō's armored belly, men smelled the truth. A sharp, sickly sweetness clung to the air, stinging eyes and throats. Aviation fuel had seeped from ruptured tanks, invisible pools evaporating into vapor. Sailors covered their mouths with cloth, whispering that they were living inside a bomb. Damage control teams worked furiously. They sealed bulkheads, hammered plates over fractures, pumped out flooding. Their voices over the intercom were steady. Flooding contained, ship stable, no danger of capsizing. Yet each minute the fumes spread farther. Then came the fateful decision. Officers feared the suffocating haze would overcome the men. They ordered the fans switched to full power. Blades whirred to life, pushing the vapor not out but everywhere, through ducts, hatches, and corridors. Spaces once clear grew heavy with the same bitter stench. A young navigation officer dared to suggest that the fans were spreading danger, not relief. His words were dismissed. Efficiency mattered more than speculation. The ship had to keep fighting. So the great Phoenix pressed on, a fortress wrapped in steel, her decks bristling with aircraft, her crew breathing poison with every passing moment. She was no longer just a carrier. She was a lantern filled with vapor, waiting for the spark that would decide her fate. It began with a spark. No one could later agree where it came from. Some swore a mechanic dropped a tool that struck the deck. Others whispered of an overheated motor or a forbidden cigarette. Whatever its source, the result was the same. The air itself ignited. In an instant, the hangar erupted. Flames rolled across the ceiling like a living wave, racing through vapor-rich corridors. The first explosion thundered upward, shaking the entire ship. Then came another and another, a savage rhythm pounding through the bulkheads. On the flight deck, pilots strapped into cockpits felt the surface tremble. Smoke seeped from elevator shafts. A Zero fighter burst into flame, its fuel and bombs cooking off in a blinding flash. Shards of metal screamed across the deck. Below, the scene was hell itself. Rows of aircraft in the hangar ignited in a chain of roaring blasts. Heat warped steel. Frames. Bulkheads buckled. Men clawed at hatches only to be driven back by fire. Others froze, eyes wide as the world around them glowed red. Survivors later recalled the silence between blasts, moments when the ship seemed to inhale, followed by another detonation that tore through the darkness. The armor that had been Taihō's pride now betrayed her. A wooden deck might have vented the force upward. Instead, her steel lid trapped the blasts inside. Pressure ricocheted through her veins, magnifying the destruction. Compartments imploded. Men were crushed or consumed before they could even cry out. From the horizon, other ships saw smoke gush from the mighty Phoenix. To them, she still floated, but within her walls, fire reigned. She was no longer a fortress, she was a furnace. By mid-afternoon, Taihō was no longer a ship but a dying volcano. Smoke belched from her island, explosions thumped deep within her hull. Steel plates bulged and seams split as fire devoured her from bow to stern. On the bridge, Admiral Ozawa listened as reports grew more desperate. Compartment collapsed, ammunition detonating, fire spreading everywhere. At 2:30, he gave the order no admiral ever wished to speak. Prepare to abandon ship. The command rippled through the steel corridors. Blackened men emerged from hatches, some carrying wounded comrades, others clutching photographs, diaries, or nothing at all. Ropes were thrown over the sides. Sailors leapt into the sea, their bodies coated in oil. Nearby destroyers and cruisers maneuvered close, tossing lines to survivors. A petty officer remembered glancing back from the water. She still stood tall, he said, but she groaned like a dying animal. You could hear her steel twisting. At 1640, the great Phoenix gave her final breath. Her stern sank first, bow rising slightly as smoke veiled her silhouette. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she slipped beneath the Philippine Sea. The waves closed with a hiss, leaving only oil, debris, and silence. Of her crew of more than 2,000, fewer than 600 survived. Over 1,600 men vanished with her into the deep. For those afloat, it was not merely the loss of a ship, it was the burial of hope. In the weeks that followed, engineers and survivors struggled to explain how Japan's most advanced carrier could vanish in a single day. The answers were bitter. Taihō's armored deck, once her pride, had sealed her fate. Instead of venting blasts upward, it trapped the fury within, turning compartments into pressure cookers of flame. The order to run ventilation at full power spread poison through every deck. And her crew, brave but untested, could not fight a fire that seemed to come from the ship's very breath. For the Americans, the lesson was clear. No single miracle ship could save a navy. Strength lay in numbers, in training, in procedures refined by experience. Their carriers endured because they could lose, won and fight on. Japan had placed its last hope in one Phoenix. When it burned, there was nothing left to rise. Among survivors, memory became a torment. Some carried scars on their skin, others only in their minds. One sailor admitted, "Every night I hear them pounding on hatches, screaming for air. I left them behind. I lived. That is my punishment." For history, Taihō became not a symbol of triumph, but a warning etched in steel and smoke. Pride cannot defeat physics, and no armor can protect against mistakes born within. The great Phoenix had been built to rise from fire. Instead, she was consumed by it. Taihō's first battle was her last, her armored decks collapsing inward, her men entombed within steel that was meant to shield them. She was not salvation. She was a tomb. For Japan, her loss was more than the end of a ship. It marked the death of a carrier fleet and the death of a dream. The decisive battle had come, and it had proven that no single miracle could defy reality. Pride became weakness. Hope became silence. In the long shadow of World War II, Taihō's story lingers as a warning. It tells us that courage cannot erase inexperience, that armor cannot overcome flawed design, that nations cannot wager everything on one fragile hope. In World War II, her sinking was not only a tactical defeat, but a symbol of collapse, a lesson carved into the sea itself. And in the memory of World War II, she remains a ghost, a ship built to endure, yet lost to the flames she was meant to survive. Today, the Philippine Sea rolls quiet above her grave. No monument marks her passing, no shrine recalls her name. Yet those who know her story remember the truth, that war devours pride as easily as it devours steel. And the only legacy worth keeping is peace.